But this survivor brain can't be the core concept in terms of positive intelligence, and as a matter of fact, it's not. Another concept that is shockingly similar to our survivor brain is known as mind traps. These mind traps function the same way your saboteurs do, as outdated pieces of evolutionary programming that limit our ability to embrace change and progress towards our goals.
Our information on mind traps comes from Unlocking Leadership Mind Traps by Jennifer Garvey Berger. Mind traps are an integral part of the human condition that has been programmed into the human genome and psyche since we learned to live in sedentary communities and our lives became tied to the lives of others. These mind traps were designed and largely implemented to help us survive the day-to-day. However, with the increasing speed and complexity of the modern world, these mind traps tend to hinder us more than help us. For example, the skills a manager may have utilized 10 to 15 years ago to make sure each milestone and goal was reached might have trouble completing the same tasks today. These mind traps include rightness, wherein just because something feels right doesn't necessarily mean that it is. Agreement, as in we want to agree more than we want to continue a disagreement-filled brainstorming session and think creatively. Control, where we want clear, designated control over a situation. Ego, where we settle ourselves into who we are now, rather than seeing who we can grow to be in the future. And then finally, simple stories, where we want stories to have a beginning, middle, and an end, which is not necessarily always the case. Although it is easy to get stuck in these mind traps, overcoming these natural instincts can mean immense success in our ever-changing world. But what about the ways our hardwiring affects others? Implicit bias tests, or more formally known as implicit association tests, or IATs, were created through Project Implicit. Launched by Bethany Teachman of the University of Virginia and Mac Nock of Harvard University, they are used to showcase our own hidden biases and blind spots that subconsciously play into how we make decisions. Many forms of these implicit association tests exist, like ones for race, age, weight, and many more. Each of us in the Leadership Institute completed the Gender Career IATs and Race IATs to make ourselves aware of any subconscious decisions our brains might make. By understanding these associations that our minds may make implicitly through survival and culture, we can better understand factors that may be inhibiting our abilities to embrace change and forcing old ways of thinking on the modern world. Correlating with resilience, emotional intelligence can affect our relationships with others, ourselves, and the community. Emotional intelligence is having the capacity and the know-how to understand and utilize your emotions in order to decrease your own stress, alleviate conflicts, and empathize with others. We measure emotional intelligence on something called the EQ scale. EQ, or Emotional Intelligence Quotient, helps you succeed through managing your stress and intense emotional reactions. There are 4 main attributes to work on to increase EQ. The first one being self-management. This is controlling personal feelings and destructive behaviors, taking initiative, following through, and adapting to changes. Then self-awareness, where you are aware of your personal behaviors and thoughts and how they affect your life. Then social awareness, which revolves around empathy, recognizing the needs, emotions, and comfort of others. And then finally, relationship management, where you are remembering to communicate well, work well with others, and keep good relationships. Overall, having an high EQ can assist you in helping your mental and physical health, deepening your relationships with others, and improving your professional performance.
Adult development is a way of describing how the mind changes as we grow older. There are 4 main stages of adult development. As you might imagine, the first stage is the simplest, and the 4th represents the most complex and beneficial stage for ourselves and those around us. These stages can also be described as forms of mind. It's also important to recognize that these forms of mind do not represent linear development. It's possible to exhibit each form of mind at any point in our adult lives. However, realize that the 4th stage is certainly the most enlightened. The first stage is the self-sovereign mind. This form of mind is focused on how the world will work for you. It's the most basic form of mind and can seem a bit childish or selfish, and that's because this is the most common form of mind for teenagers. While teens are learning about the world around them and learning to create independent thought, nearly everything is still provided for them, and they start to think that's how things should work. Self-sovereign forms of mind ask questions such as, what's in it for me? What are others doing that will affect me? Or, what are the immediate rewards or consequences if I do X, Y, Z? The next form of mind is the socialized mind. This form is dominated by a consideration for how a person fits into the world around them or society. There's a sense of self-doubt in this form because it's a person's thought processes may be controlled by a need to fit in or seem like they're doing the right thing. This form is common in younger adults who still care deeply about their place in life. Questions they may ask are, what will others say? Who will tell me whether I'm right or not? Or, how will this decision affect my standing in the group? Next, we have the self-authored mind. This stage of adult development is characterized by knowing who you are and what you want. When you know this, you can begin to work towards those goals and make decisions that will lead you down the path you believe is right. This stage of mind can be hard to reach as a young adult, since we rarely truly know what we want. While this stage represents balance and a positive direction for our development, it does not take into account the whole point of this summit, change. Questions self-authored minds may ask are, how does this forward my values, goals, or principles? Is this a good problem to take on? Or, how do I develop standards to judge my success? Finally, we reach the fourth stage, self-transforming. As you might have guessed, this is the form of mind that represents embracing change. The self-transforming mind knows that the world around them is changing. In order to find success, you must ask questions that allow you to adapt and focus on goals while considering outside forces. This form of mind gives a bird's eye view of everything going on in one's life and the world around them. Questions they may ask are, what can I learn from this? How does this issue reshape myself and others? Or, what assumptions have I made that affect my perception of this problem? Recognizing which form of mind we are currently exhibiting, we can move towards embracing change by moving up that ladder and beginning to ask more self-transforming questions.
Adult development is just one of the many parts of embracing change. But as we have pointed out, there are many challenges to this. It is essential to understand that none of these changes can happen overnight. The attitude of embracing change will take years to develop, and it is impossible to fully develop due to the ever-changing world. This is a daunting task that can be attained by having grit and resilience. First, we learn about the idea of grit. This comes from the book entitled Grit by Angela Duckworth. Mrs. Duckworth describes grit as passion and perseverance for long-term goals with stamina and sticking with your future day in and day out, while also working extremely hard to make that future a reality. Potentially one of the most interesting parts about grit is that it's not actually related to IQ. Mrs. Duckworth concluded that IQ is an indicator of how quickly and easily someone learns new information. High IQ can make being gritty easier, but high IQ individuals are not necessarily gritty. I learned from an early age that in school I needed to work harder to attain similar goals to those whose school came naturally to. This was much more obvious in high school than it is now in college. I vividly remember taking my U.S. history class with some of my best friends and talking to them about upcoming quizzes or tests, normally the day of, and them saying that, I never study, it just kind of seems to work. Meanwhile, I would respond with, oh yeah, me too, knowing full well that I studied for hours the previous night. Then, a week later, we would get our grades back, and lo and behold, my friends would either get the same grade as me, or sometimes do even better. It is easy to think to yourself, oh, they studied and are just doing the same routine as I am. But, because these were some of my closest friends, I knew that they genuinely did not study. This fact baffled me for all 4 years of high school. And then college happened. And I still stay in close contact with many of these same friends, and we are all doing various types of engineering at various schools. The difference now is that many of those same friends struggled out of the gate at college, whereas I was able to make the transition with relative ease. Once again, I was confused by this because I know deep down that they are inherently smarter than I am. Then, once I read through this book, I realized that multiple factors through my life instilled grit into me. I knew how to put my head into a book and absorb the information that I need that I didn't already know. In terms of grit, I set my future as being a successful student and followed my personal steps to achieve that goal with passion and perseverance. To be clear, I'm not saying that any of my friends did not share this goal, but because I struggled, I learned how to work hard and not just fall back on my laurels. This grit is is what has gotten me through some of the most difficult classes that I have taken. Grit is something whose reward manifests itself in the future rather than in the moment. This is why it is so critical to embracing change. In most cases, the initial acceptance of change will be difficult and may even strain your momentary successes. But if that change is part of your future goal and you are willing to stick to it, then you can meet that future and be more successful than you were prior to said change. In order to build grit, it is necessary to thoroughly introspect about keys to life and develop your leadership resilience. Forbes defines leadership resilience as a person who sees failures as a temporary setback that can be recovered from easily. This is intimately related to grit, since in the pursuit of building grit, people will fail. Resilience requires a lot of introspection, and one of the ways that you can look into it is by reading 21 Days to Resilience by Zelina Montminy. In this book, there are 21 exercises that are meant to be completed one day at a time to force you to introspect about how your self, spirit, and social lives all interact with resilience. Through the progression of these exercises, individuals will identify future goals, attitudes towards that future, and mentality towards challenges. By exploring these areas, it is easier to see where we as individuals can improve our leadership skills while also facilitating success in our lives. For the short term, the goal of resilience is to not only better yourself, but also to learn tools to make embracing change successful. As I said earlier, without failure, there is no success. Without any tools to identify these failures, then there's no way to improve. This is one of the goals of 21 Days of Resilience. Additionally, after identifying some of these shortcomings, it is important to then take the actions that we have recommended to embrace that change. No matter the circumstances, changes will need to be made. Whether it be mind traps, saboteurs, or any other shortcomings, it is important to work day in and day out to fix what encapsulates the essence of embracing change. The combination of these two subjects is how we as individuals can better adapt to and embrace change. Both building resilience and grit will require much effort and introspection in order to find areas to focus on and develop. Also, this development is never finished, and there will always be improvements that can be made.